Well, on the Iron Range, two newspapers that once competed for subscribers have fully merged into one daily paper. The former Mesabi Daily News and Hibbing Daily Tribune have merged to form the Mesabi Tribune. The paper will be delivered 6 days a week to customers in the Hibbing and Virginia areas. Almanac North producer Greg Grell talked with Aaron Brown, former Hibbing Tribune editor, about the merger.
I come from the Hibbing side, the Hibbing Daily Tribune, a former editor, and their newspaper has a history that dates back to the 1890s, 1894 and 1899 for the Tribune. And then they had merged with the News, which predated them. And the Mesabi Daily News is actually it's a product of a merger of Virginia area newspapers from over the years. And it's really interesting because I do this historical research for my writing quite a bit. I've gotten to know these old papers, and I'm talking about 100 years ago, and the way that these newspapers interacted with each other. It was really like a Twitter fight in the early 20th century, only they used printing presses. And so there is this I'd call it a good-natured rivalry, in that they usually tried to compliment each other before savagely insulting one another, these editors of the old papers. And yeah, that relationship existed for a long time. Rivalries over geography. The range is known as having a bit of a parochial history. Each town thinks it's the best. But there's a lot of that. But there's also a lot of shared interests and times where they teamed up, and that was all part of the history as well. So the Hibbing paper was purchased by the Murphy Company, John Murphy, who was a Superior publisher back in I was trying to remember the exact date, but it was towards the end of the 80s, the early 90s, 1990s. And at the same time, they bought the Mesabi Daily News, and those papers then went through when Murphy merged with the McGinnis papers. It was Murphy McGinnis, and then it was American. Some other consolidated company bought them out, and then now they're owned by the Adams Publishing Group, based in Maryland, which is a company that owns hundreds of regional small newspapers across the country, which is the trend, as you know, papers getting bought up by larger companies and then run as one big conglomerate, but trying to maintain the individual character of the community and a local staff and a local paper. And that's what these two papers have provided the last several years. And now they've merged into the paper. In fact, I've got it right here. This is the first edition of the new Mesabi Tribune, which is now, in a strange twist, the only daily newspaper north of I think in the northern half of the state, because the Duluth Tribune, of course, the biggest of the newspapers, has gone to a twice-weekly and online format. So lots of interesting twists and turns that have led to this happening, but this is the result of their decision regarding the business conditions facing newspapers and the media in rural places.
Now, you brought up the News Tribune, and of course, they've pointed at COVID as kind of making this necessary. Is that similar? Is that what's happened with the Mesaba and Hibbing papers? Or is this something that was inevitably going to happen anyway?
I think you could make an argument that something like this was inevitable. You might have seen the papers try to do a twice-weekly format, like what Duluth is doing, under different circumstances. But really the effect on business conditions, advertising revenue especially, was so immediate and devastating this last spring when COVID shut most of the economy down for a couple of months. And really, it's still partially shut down and might be for some time. And so if the business conditions, which were already, you'd call them fair to poor anyway, being a rural area without a lot of a diversified industry, with a shrinking model because of online competitions and online ad revenues and the loss of classifieds and all these things you hear about when it comes to the conditions in newspaper. Well, all of that just got worse quickly. And so the Hibbing and Mesabi newspapers were already sharing news staff. In fact, they had really merged their newsrooms to a large degree. They were sharing content, coordinating content and coverage. It was really just a really easy call, I think, for them to merge and just shave their printing costs in half, or their some of their background staffing costs in half, so they could just focus on the one newsroom, the one newspaper. We're really entering a period where media is changing. The difference, I mean, Greg, you come from the TV tradition and the radio tradition, and I've been in the radio and the print tradition. I don't know that it's all that different anymore. Everybody's shooting video, taking pictures, recording things, posting things, writing articles, and then it all goes to the website. It's really kind of interesting how the media has become something a little different than we remember it, even 10, 20 years ago. So that's all changing. We don't know the final model yet. As I said before the interview, I'm just glad to still be here and surviving and thriving somehow in this crazy world.
We are talking with Aaron Brown, columnist and former Hibbing Daily Tribune editor. And Aaron, for the public watching tonight, what's lost, you think, as we continue to see media consolidation and smaller newsrooms and just plain fewer people covering local news? What is lost, and why should the public care about that?
Well, I think the public should care because there's a lot that goes into a community. It's funny because the government that most affects your life is your local government, your city council, and then to another degree, your county government. And these governments impact your life dramatically, far more than the state legislature does, or the Congress does, or what the president's doing in the White House. And yet, I think if you ask your average person, what they're all charged up about politically, they're usually referring to a national or a state issue, or they're thinking about party politics. So newspapers and local newspapers are what provide the contextual coverage of what's really happening in your community, what's good and bad, what's working and not. There's really no one else minding the, looking for corruption, looking for double dealing, looking for waste and fraud and for injustice and crime. And these are the things that the local coverage and that an individual can't always get the best picture of on his or her own. I think the really good evidence of why we need some kind of media, whether you call it a newspaper or a local media organization, however you phrase it, is if you look at social media, whenever something happens on a local scale, it's inundated with rumors and innuendos and assumptions that that some national story is coming to get us, based in our local community, when a good local reporter could have uncovered the truth rather quickly and put it in the newspaper or on their website. And so I think if we shouldn't be so casual about throwing these things out and saying they're relics of the past, because we need these services in our communities. And if we don't have them, we are the ones who will be exploited and held in the darkness.
Well, Aaron Brown, are certainly happy that we're going to be able to continue to read your column in the Mesabi Tribune, the new merged papers. And thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Greg.